I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Hey everyone, this is Mark Scribner. I'm your host of the Shrimp Tank, along with my co-host John Warner from Link Ventures in Boston, Massachusetts. Just would like to let everyone know that the Shrimp Tank is nationally syndicated through iHeart, Google, Stitch, SoundCloud, basically anywhere you can get your podcast, as well as YouTube. We'd love to get your followership. So if you just smash that like button, you can get the alert for this show and upcoming shows. John, I wanted to see if you could give our listeners just a quick bio on Link Ventures and some of the great things that they're up to right now.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. We're a direct-to-consumer fund, venture fund. We have deployed close to 80% of our capital. We looked at 2,500 companies the last 2 years. We invested in 16, writing $3 to $8 million checks over the lifetime of the companies. We only look at software, and we only look at companies that we think we can help scale with our expertise on data and understanding consumers. And we're about to close a second fund, and it's a little bit bigger. So now we got to go find 32 companies. So if you're a founder and you have a great direct-to-consumer company, we'd love to hear it. We look at things across different verticals, and I'm excited, as always, to do a show with you. You want to help people, empower people with street smarts, and I think we have a great guest today.
We do. We have an amazing guest today. His name is Joe Malone. He was the former treasurer receiver of Massachusetts. I think it's a perfect segue into Link Ventures because Joe's current position is also in that space. The entrepreneur, angel investing, has a lot of connectivity with startups and founders and mentorship. So we're going to get into that. But just real quickly, a bio of Joe. He's an amazing personality, very widely known, was very well known for improving the Massachusetts pension, which was a bad performer. It got very much to the top, which was a huge undertaking for him. Also innovated the lottery, got the lottery into the national scale, had some huge improvements there. And Joe, it's really great to have you here on the show today.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you guys, Mark, John. When I got the invitation, it was great because most people that I end up doing interviews with, it's focused mostly on politics. I love the fact that we're making the segue from politics to entrepreneurship and the whole startup world, which is right now my passion. I love it.
Yeah, and so that's my first question, and I think politics is definitely a tough topic to get into these days. But I was curious about the transition into the public sector to the private sector in terms of the skill set, because you don't get paid a lot, you get a lot of flack being in those roles, but there's a skill set that you could adapt, and there is a big shortage of younger people trying to get into politics, and we have a vacuum in leadership in the future. But I was curious about, in your seat, having made that transition to the private sector, what are some of the things and the skill sets that you've brought from that sector to the private sector?
Well, it's interesting because when I got out of college in 1978, I volunteered on a campaign. It was Ed Brooke who was running for Senate, and I liked it. I'd been a government major at Harvard and thought, this is something that I feel passionate about. Well, that was 78. I ended up then running against Ted Kennedy 10 years later in 1988. And then that led to my being elected in 1990. But the entire journey was an entrepreneurial journey because I was putting everything on the line. That was 10 years of my life, 12 years of my life. And there hadn't been, when I got elected state treasurer, there hadn't been a Republican elected in Massachusetts statewide in 18 years. So basically it was like I burned the boat, it was, I wasn't turning back here. I was basically saying, I got to go out, put up with people saying no oftentimes and not being thin-skinned like an entrepreneur raising money for their startup. You just got to, accept what you've received in form of a no, but learn from the process and then pivot or sharpen the message or whatever the case might be. And so those kind of, successes, failures really positioned me well for the world of entrepreneurship. And while I was state treasurer, my fixation was always on how do we do this better, more efficiently for the consumers, that being the citizens of Massachusetts. So we did things that we'd all look at now as common sense, where they, for example, at the lottery, were paying state employees as delivery men to the thousands of agents around the state. Well, we got in there and said, well, there's FedEx, there's UPS. Why are we paying state employees who take 21 days to deliver to all the sites, where on 24 hours, FedEx or UPS at a third of the cost can do the same thing? So it was always that mentality of what's the need in the marketplace here? And the marketplace in those days just happened to be the citizens of Massachusetts. Now, when I work with a startup company, it's what's the need that needs to be filled out there for the general population of consumers. And so it's been a very seamless segue from my standpoint. And what I often mentor the folks I'm working with, who in many instances end up being in their 20s or 30s, is, you know what? It's not for the faint of heart. You can't be thin-skinned. You can't let rejection bother you for 1 minute. You've established a result. If you didn't get that investment, well, you know what? Take them off the list. Move on to the next one, learning all the way. And so from my standpoint, whether it's mentoring at Harvard Business School or whether it's working with the companies that I've helped raise money for and I'm now providing advice to, I love it. I feel like I'm just getting started, you know, having left government in 1999. Here I'm making this transition over the last 20 years, and it just keeps getting better and better.
Great. Thanks for sharing your enthusiasm for entrepreneurship. You know, when people think of Massachusetts, they think of it as a Dem state. But if you go way back, like the Saltonstalls and the Cabots, we had a lot of Republicans. So, but I guess, you know, you were one of a few Republicans during that period. You mentioned running against Ted Kennedy. I think he passed away in 2009. What was he like as a candidate? I think he's famous for having made friends across the aisle. You know, was that a bruising campaign, or were there moments where he was sort of above it and you know, showed you respect?
So it's interesting. I was sitting in a meeting one day, and a poll had been commissioned in Massachusetts with a nationally prominent pollster who had a number of victories, U.S. Senate seats, presidential campaigns, a fellow by the name of Arthur Finkelstein. So he delivers the poll results. At the time, I'm the executive director of the Mass State Republican Party, and there's a fellow named Ray Shammy who's the chairman. And Ray had commissioned the poll because he was thinking about running against Kennedy. He had run against Kennedy 6 years earlier, then run against John Kerry, and both unsuccessful. But he thought, well, let me have one more shot at this Senate seat. So the pollster says to the people sitting around the table, Ted Kennedy is not going to be defeated. He is popular even among a lot of conservatives. He is an institution. The Kennedy name is magic. Ray, you can't win this race. So Ray says, well, what are we going to do? Just let him go unopposed here? And Finkelstein says, no, what you want to do is find some young guy or young woman who is a rising star or has the potential to be a star. Have them run that race. They won't win, but they will get name recognition, and hopefully they run the race the right way. They'll position themselves for a victory in a couple of years when they run for another office. So all these about 8 people sitting around the room are scratching their head and they're, you know, thinking, well, who would be the person who fits that profile? And that goes on, you know, brainstorming for about 10 minutes. And finally, Finkelstein points at me and he goes, he'd be perfect. He ought to be the one that you run. So I'm 33 years old at the time. I've never run for political office. I'm about to get married. I'm engaged and I'm going to get married in a few months. And I said, whoa, you know, this is, you know, something that I got to check with my fiance first. But if she's a go, then I'll be a go. So at any rate, I go off and run against Ted Kennedy. But before I did, I reached out to a guy by the name of David Nyan at the Boston Globe and gave him the story that I was going to make the run. I gave it to him exclusively. And I said, you know what, David, I want you to know, and please print it in your column, that this isn't going to be about personal attacks or anything else. This is going to be a discussion of the issues. I have one approach to solving problems. Ted Kennedy has his liberal approach, and let's have at it. So at any rate, from that point forward, it was all about ideology. It was all about ideas. And when the campaign ended, he couldn't have been nicer. You know, he called me the night of the election and told me how impressed he was with the way I'd run the campaign and the way in which I, you know, had a knowledge of the issues. And then fast forward a few years later, maybe a decade later, my mom passed away. He was on the phone calling me to express his condolences. And just in the years that passed, he couldn't have been nicer on a human level. You know, he was really, really a gentleman and very thoughtful.
That's amazing. And yeah, so that's where the sharp elbow stuff was created, I would assume, being able to get in there and try to fight and articulate the message.
Well, you know, I grew up in Waltham, the youngest of 7 kids. My dad passed away when I was 12. So my mother, who was a great influence, great inspiration in my life, when I was 12 years old forward, she was always the one who was, no dream is too big. You know, don't limit yourself in any way. Don't let anybody tell you you can't achieve something just because it hasn't been done. And I can remember in my race for the treasurer's office, we did these radio ads, which were called the Malone Report. And each week I would record 1 or 2 messages where it was my opportunity to speak directly to the public, unscreened by any media. But one of the stories I told was the Roger Bannister story, which I'm sure you probably heard. First person to break the 4-minute mile barrier. And prior to that, all the experts, whether they from science, medicine, said it can't be done. It just absolutely can't be done. It will never be done. Well, he breaks the 4-minute mile barrier. And the next thing you know, 46 days later, another person does it. And then it just kept getting broken and broken and broken. And my message to Republicans was, it's been 18 years. Don't fall into this trap that it can't be done. It's going to be done. We're going to do it. And then we're going to get other people to do it afterwards. And now it's been 30 years since that victory. And in those 30 years, 22 of the years has been a Republican governor in office. So that has created the balance of power. Whereas before, a one-party state, I don't care whether it's all Republican or all Democrat, it can lead to an abuse of power. And we've been fortunate in Massachusetts where there's been that more of a 2-party system and more of a balance of power. And I take great pride in feeling like I broke that barrier. And since then, we've been a better state as a result.
Yeah, I didn't want this to be a political thing, but I was always curious, being a blue state, that part of the Republican Party. But do you think that's why we have Republican governors over and over, is that balance of power?
I think it is. I think people recognize if you had one supermarket chain in Massachusetts, then the products probably wouldn't be as good, the prices would be higher, and the service would be worse. You know, competition is healthy, and it keeps people on their toes, keeps people honest, keeps people more efficient, and people being more responsive to feedback.
Go ahead, John. Do you want to go?
Yeah, that was nice that you mentioned Ed Brooke. You know, he first African-American senator in a long time, and David Nyan. I know he died, I think, shoveling snow, but yeah. I read his pieces quite often, and I know his cousin. So you know, those are names. Thanks for sharing. I'm curious. People talk about 98 and 99 as Web 2.0, that was the beginning of Web 2.0, and you didn't want to miss it. And Jeff Bezos drove across country and had an idea for Amazon, and while it started with books, you know, today it's much more. There's a Harvard Business School grad who's now running, who created AWS, now running the whole thing. Andy. I'm curious, many people say now is Web 3.0, and I'm wondering how different is the state, from 20 years ago to today, at helping to facilitate these technological opportunities and for entrepreneurs to really thrive? Is that something that you've been tracking? And just any insight into the state of entrepreneurship these days?
Haven't been tracking it too closely, but I will say when I drive through the toll booths with an Easy Pass now versus having to wait in line to, pull cash out of your pocket, it's just a reminder of how things have changed. Of course, when I was in office, there weren't podcasts, it wasn't the internet, there wasn't email, and so all of that kind of progress has been made. And now, to your point, John, I think she's just on the cusp of another wave of incredible innovation that's about to take place. And I think of one company I'm involved with, which I think is going to have a major impact on marketing in this country, because it empowers the consumer to be compensated for tagging a company. So they walk into, let's say, a bank, and the bank has a QR code saying, tag us and we'll put $10 into your bank account. Thanks for supporting such and such bank. Or you go to American Red Cross and you give a pint of blood, and on the way out, you see a sign that says, tag us, tell all your millennial friends that they should be giving blood too, and you become eligible to get a $500 gift card on JetBlue, So you're going to get that kind of exposure that is tremendous from a standpoint of marketing in this case, and you're doing it more efficiently, more effectively at a time when everybody's concerned about their margins. Because of the cost of personnel, because of the cost of products. And I think in their own way, in its own way, government is finding lots and lots of ways to do things smarter, more efficiently. I'll give you one quick example. When I first got into office, there was a bank in the treasurer's office where there were, I think, 6 tellers to cash checks in the State House for legislators, their staff, and so forth. So you had to have the payroll for those 6 people. They would all eventually be on a pension. You had cash in a vault in the treasurer's office so that the cash was available for cash checking, for check cashing. And so when I got in there, there were these things that had just come on the market called ATM machines. So we replaced all of that banking operation with an ATM machine. And I remember a state senator coming up to me, and she was not happy. She kind of put her finger in front of my nose and said, "What you did by replacing the bank with that machine is an insult to all of us." I said, "Use the ATM machine. It's not a problem." She goes, "Look, I'm a very, very busy person. I don't have time to learn how to use an ATM machine." So I think back to progress doesn't often come easily in government because, again, government bureaucracy is kind of stuck in its way, but reluctantly it occurs, and we're all better off as a result.
Joe, the tagline of the show is where book smarts and street smarts collide. In your current role, you've been able to lecture and mentor business owners, entrepreneurs in angel investing and some up and coming businesses. What are some of the traits that you see that are good and maybe not so good, and some of the struggles that anybody wanting to be an entrepreneur and the difficulty of trying to set up a business is?
Sure. Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's not for the faint of heart, because I tell my mentees there are these startup gods up there who might want to put you through the worst of worst trials and tribulations. And when you get to the point where someone is sending an email and saying, that payment is due, or, some other bill is coming in that you can't pay it this week because you're waiting for an investor who's kicking the tires, and he's probably going to, or she's probably going to make that investment, but you just need to bear with me. And so it becomes a case of humanity. You have to, don't send a text, don't send an email. Pick up the phone now and say, here's our situation. Can you work with us to get us through this? Or it might be you're selling your product and you can walk in there and simply talk about the technology, or you can say, here's what's in it for you on your end as the end user. And your messaging becomes so important, and your storytelling and your the way in which you carry yourself, the level of enthusiasm that you convey is so important, whether it's raising money or whether it's getting some of those hopefully early adopters to come on board. You need to be so effusive with your enthusiasm that that person then says, I don't want to be on the wrong side of FOMO, fear of missing out. I want to make sure I get on board this very successful train that's going to be leaving the station shortly. So it's a lot of it is communication, and of course that's what politics and government to a great degree is about. And the other thing that I mentioned earlier again is the idea of being told no, and taking that kind of an answer and just saying, you know what, no big deal, I'll brush myself off, on to the next prospect. But if you take that kind of a rejection and just can't handle it, it puts you kind of in a downward spiral for 3 days or a week, then you're just not made for this business. You need to go into something that's less risk averse, which is fine. There's some fabulous people who go the corporate way and they do tremendously well. They know that paycheck is going to be there for them every week. But if you're going down the startup entrepreneurial path, you need to have a pretty good chin. And not only you, but the team you put together. It's imperative that that team has that same kind of mental toughness.
Joe, there's been a lot of talk about the Great Resignation. I think coming out of the pandemic, we're not fully out of it, but a lot of people just working from home, working remote, and it's really upended a lot of companies. I'm just curious, you've had a lot of experience watching companies in this Commonwealth thrive. What do you make of these challenging times and finding talent and retaining them, and the habits of millennials and Gen Z not wanting to do the traditional work that had been done before?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a work in progress as to where this all ends up. Clearly working remotely is something that we're not going to turn that around. I think so many young people now, and I'm a father of 4 with kids ranging in age from 32 to 24, and 3 of the 4 of them are working remotely, and I can't ever picture them going back to the conventional mode of working. And then the other thing is as you both know, there's no aversion to changing companies, and young people are looking around them and saying, oh, John or Mary, who was here last week, they just took an offer from a new company. They've moved on. And so I think that's going to continue to be the case. It'll no longer be the umpteen number of years and you get the gold watch. And then lastly, I think it's a case where right now, at least, it's an employee's market. And it's going to be a case where you're going to have companies who are going to have to make the sales pitch as to why they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Please come and work for us, and continue to keep making that workplace better and better. And so, I think when you add it all up, there's a lot of good that's coming from the post-COVID era, but there's also a lot of uncertainty that's coming from it. When you see, for example, I was in a store the other day and I overheard a woman talking to her husband and said, that was the restaurant that just called. We have reservations tonight. They want to know if we'll relinquish our reservations because they're short of staff or they're overbooked. I thought, wow, that is a sign of the times that we would never have heard 2 or 3 years ago or before. So it's, I think technology to a great degree will fill some of those voids, and you're going to see more and more needs out there that we didn't have 3 years ago that we do have now. And technology will fill some of those personnel gaps and will fill some of the other gaps that exist. I will say that I don't miss driving down the expressway coming up from the South Shore, in Situate. It's not having to go into meetings quite as often where people say, where do you want to meet for lunch or where do you want to meet for this meeting? But the flip side of that is the serendipitous stuff that comes about by being at, a particular restaurant in Boston. You bump into somebody and you say, "What are you up to?" "Oh, good. I'm going to give you a call, and here's why, because I think you're going to like this opportunity I have." That to me is, from a personal standpoint, is the biggest downer. It really is. I love people, love bumping into people, love renewing old friendships, and you really don't get that by reaching out to someone kind of coldly and say, "Can we set up a Zoom call? I want to tell you about this opportunity I have." So, yeah, it's a different world.
Well, John could satisfy that experience for the Quinn invitation for lunch one of these days.
Sounds great.
I was curious. John's business partner, David, had made a comment. He was a guest a few months ago on our show, and he said one of the things that irked him by being in Logan Airport, seeing all the founders and all the companies that were originated in Massachusetts, and a lot of those companies like the Zuckerbergs of the world have taken themselves out of Massachusetts and moved themselves to different parts of the country. I'm just curious, in the landscape of Massachusetts, like what's good about Massachusetts in terms of what they offer, and what can be done to kind of pull or retain that talent in Massachusetts versus having them go somewhere else like California.
Yeah, well, of course, biotech, pharmaceutical companies. I mean, we have a very, very strong foothold there. And with the MITs and the Harvards and the Boston colleges, you name it, BU, Northeastern, on and on and on, the future is very, very bright for Massachusetts, because in this knowledge-based economy, we are a sweet spot. And now Silicon Valley, they've got their, strengths, and the Zuckerbergs of the world are probably smart to move out there, because Silicon Valley is more suited for that type of company. And I would say, when you're trying to fund a company, there's certain startups that just don't register with most investor types, particularly angels in the Massachusetts marketplace. Certainly not as much as they do out west, or maybe even in New York. So I think in some cases you have to move out of necessity, but I still think that there are enough strong points to Massachusetts, as I said, particularly pharmaceutical, biotech, where I think the future of this state is going to be bright for a very, very long time.
Joe, let me ask you, what are the kind of, you said you enjoy being an angel investor. What are the kind of companies you're looking to invest in, and what are the things you prioritize to understand to see if it's a good fit for your investment thesis?
So to make it clear, I raise money for these entities. So okay. I'm less of an investor myself, but I'm out there tapping angels on the shoulder and saying, check this out. So the companies I'm involved with now cover a pretty good range, and I turn down quite a few companies to pluck out the ones that I think are going to be such that when I run into that angel, 6 months later, I have a good story to tell him or her. And one that I told you was about Guru Club and how it's going to affect marketing, I think, in a very positive way. Another is a sock company called CircuFiber, which brings an infrared thread to socks for diabetics. And it's FDA approved. It's been endorsed by the Podiatrist Society of America. It is getting great testimonials from patients who wear them. Yale Medical School has done a study, and they've said great things about it, a clinical study. So that's another one. Another one is a company called Noble, which just signed a pilot program with the biggest music festival company in the country. And it would be a case where you have an app that you can simply draw down a menu, order any drinks you want, any food. You could be out in the middle of a field at a music festival and they'll find you. Or the same is true, they work with Mohegan Sun. You could be poolside, the same thing. And of course, from Mohegan Sun's standpoint, it helps them in a day and age with the lack of personnel they can shorten that whole cycle of when the order gets made to when the drinks get delivered. Another one is pay by car, where it's the only company in the country that has a relationship with Easy Pass. You pull up to the gas pump on a day when it's about 30 below zero. You don't have to put that card through the machine. You just step up, put the gas into your tank, and Easy Pass, it bills you. And that's also got ramifications in a lot of other ways, including when the day comes when instead of paying a gas tax, you pay based on the mileage that you cover with your car. It would be a way of doing billing in that respect as well. So those are some of them. Got another company that puts into play EV charges, electric vehicle charges, and of course with the money that's coming through the infrastructure bill that was passed last spring, then you're going to see a lot more EV charges popping up throughout the country. So those are some of the things I'm involved in.
Joe, let's flip the script a little bit. If you were to be in the private sector, I just think of like Charlie Baker as a name, was very successful, Harvard Pilgrim, a good operator, and then yes. Switched from the private sector to the public sector. Do you see that as being a powerful tool for someone who wants to run for office, having some success? I mean, I guess it could be a two-edged sword.
Oh, but... I actually, I think it's a tremendous route to go. I had always thought that I would make enough money that I'd be very comfortable, and that was the advice that I was given by mentors of mine. Get very comfortable, maybe at the age of 50, get into government after you've been in the business world. And as I told you with the story before, it all got flipped on its head. But I think it's a tremendous route to go. And actually, just a side note with Charlie, he had an interesting route because he was Bill Well's administration and finance secretary. So he got a taste of government, then went back into the private sector, and then came back into the public sector. So it gave him best of both worlds. And I think that formula is unfortunately far more the exception than the rule among politicians. And you get people in government from the day they get out of college to the day they breathe their last breath. I think they're narrow-minded. Their focus is not such that they recognize that the goose that lays the golden eggs, the business community, the small business in particular, is what we need to bring along in this country to create jobs. And so, I've seen time and time again where legislation goes through and then you have all of these unexpected consequences. And it's because there's a lack of knowledge on those who are making the laws. There's a lack of knowledge on their part because they've never lived the life of an entrepreneur. They've never met a payroll. They've never known what it's like to be in a position where somebody slaps a big, oftentimes unnecessary regulation on you, and it changes the entire journey of your business.
Powerful.
Joe, when you were treasurer, what states were you looking to for innovation? What states kept you up at night, like they're doing better than us? What states did you go visit just to get some perspective? So Massachusetts could be as successful as it is.
That's a
you
great.
did such a nice job running the state.
Thank you, John. That's a great question. When my wife and I got married, she was working at Bain and Company, and so probably within a week of my getting elected, we're talking about putting together the transition team and so forth. And she said, Joe, we're in the depths of a recession here. You may want to call over to Bain and see if you could get some volunteer help from them to go in and do a best demonstrated practice of every single component of the treasurer's office and see what they come up with. And so I reached out to Bill Ockmeyer at Bain, who's still very active around Boston and doing a great job. And I asked, if that was possible. He said, well, I don't know if we could do the whole thing, but why don't we see if we can get the consulting arms of the big six at the time to see if they can contribute some manpower, woman power, and collectively we'll get this done. Well, fast forward, that's exactly what we did. And so they ended up not only finding one state that, boy, this is a model to emulate, or two states, but finding the best of breed that existed throughout the country, and then implementing it at the treasurer's office. And the other thing that we did well with regard to the pension fund, which we took from the worst performer of the 50 states to the best, we did it within about a year or two, was I reached out to the fellow who was running Harvard's endowment, fellow who was running MIT's, and this third fellow over at Harvard Business School had been the deputy United States treasurer. And I said, listen, I'd love for you guys to come on, be the investment committee. I promise you, I will never give you a call saying, hey, can you get these people 100 million to manage here? You know, it'd be totally apolitical. You make the calls based on the best decision for the pensioners, for the taxpayers. So anyway, lo and behold, the deal was struck. They did an amazing job, took us to number one in the country. And when you're talking about $30 billion of funds, to go from worst to best in performance, that's adding tremendous value. So that's the other thing that I took pride in, and I thought made a heck of a lot of sense. And that was tapping the best and brightest throughout the Commonwealth, of which there are many, and asking them to come in and provide service to the Commonwealth on a volunteer basis. And that's the other thing I wish would be done more often in politics and in government. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen as often as it should.
Joe, you that's really fascinating. The collaboration that you look, it seems like that's been a common theme across your career. Do you carry that over to your business life now in terms of trying to collaborate with practitioners or best in class?
Oh, absolutely. You know, picking brains is one of the things that I've always thought, is why wouldn't you do it? And sometimes with younger folks, there's an attitude of, no, I got this. This is, what, you just never know. Give them a call. No, I don't think there'll be synergy there. What do you have to lose? Reach out. Don't worry about rejection. And again, I stress that word rejection because it stops so many people from either asking for advice or asking for them to get involved as an investor or be one of the early adopters. Don't worry about rejection. Best that can happen is they say yes. The worst that can happen is to say, oh, I'll take them off the list of people that maybe I can count on to provide some help. But you make progress one way or another. And before you asked that, made that request for help, you didn't have the help anyway. So the net is not a loss. It's just you ended up resolving the question mark, and now you know the answer. So yeah, I'm a great believer in collaboration. I'm one of those types that when you're sitting around a conference table, I'm hoping that I'm the least bright person at the table. And I've made great progress in life by not having to let people know, oh, I'm a pretty smart guy. Instead, I love to see other people feel good about themselves. And I can remember an employee of mine, the director of the lottery, saying to me, Joe, you're not going to like hearing this, but I said, wait a minute. Don't ever say that, Beth. I'm cool with, don't worry about hurting my feelings. Let it fly, And again, that's something where growing up, as I did, the youngest of 7 kids, not having a thin skin is really a plus in the business world, and particularly in the world of startups. Don't have that thin skin. You benefit tremendously.
So, Joe, if I remember correctly, I think the Mather School, the first public school in America, even older than Boston Latin, I think the lottery had something to do with it. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the lottery and where it is now and where it could go? I feel like a lot of your tenure as our state treasurer was innovating it. But curious if you're keeping tabs on it and how's it doing now and where could it go?
Yeah, so in terms of its history, it was interesting. Frank Sargent was the governor at the time, so that was early 70s when it came into being, and the legislature passed it. He vetoed it, and they overrode his veto. So that's why it ended up in the office of treasurer, because the treasurer at the time, Robert Q. Crane, was a Democrat. So with it came patronage and power. So off went the lottery. And under Bob Crane, the lottery was very successful in the sense that lots of Massachusetts residents loved placing their bets. And so when I got in there, my goal was to keep it successful so that cities and towns that rely on it to pay for education, firefighters, police officers, that money continued to flow. But I said, how do we run it more efficiently? Because at the time, for every dollar wagered and lost, 4.4% went to overhead. Well, by the time we finished in a few years, that number went from 4.4 down to 2.2. So essentially, we cut the overhead in half. And then we introduced technology and the computer ability to enter the multi-state drawing. So now you get those $200 million, jackpots, which are beyond, amazing. And I also used to say, look, have fun with it. Don't bet the grocery money because the house doesn't lose too often. This is a case where you don't want to make this, what your investment strategy is for your retirement. But it was a fun thing to be a part of because you get these winners coming in and we do a press conference and they'd hold up the big check and it was whatever the amount was, 10 million, 20 million. And we would give them counseling, of course, because nationwide, the number of people end up winning those big jackpots, but then mismanage the funds, at least at that time, was a frighteningly high number, including bankruptcies personally. So there's been advances made, but of course, John, you also see now what's going on with legalized sports betting and with the ability for someone to place a bet on the Patriots and then at halftime place another bet, that they'll score more points than the opponent in the second half, or whatever the case might be. So that genie is definitely out of the bottle, and it's a whole new world where if you're running the lottery, you need to stay up with all the changes that are occurring out there. And my sense is they're doing a pretty good job of it.
That was going to be my question, was the online sports betting. I would assume if you were back in office, that would have been under your domain in terms of monitoring and regulating. But I'm curious, do you think, something like that? I mean, I know the revenue, I see people traveling, over a bridge from New York to New Jersey, but now it's in New York. But it seems like a lot of the country is really looking at this as a new revenue source. And I don't know if they're doing the due diligence because, you look at like people with pandemic money, that the sports gambling has been pretty prolific. But I'm just curious, do you think that's something that's a net positive?
I worry about it, actually. I grew up, again, in Waltham, where I saw kids get themselves in big trouble. Now, this is when it was making a bet through a bookmaker, but, getting themselves into so much trouble that it basically destroyed them financially for years. And I think the jury is still out on that, where every time someone turns around, if their sleeve is being pulled and it's like, hey, if you made your bet today, I'm not sure if that's good in terms of the general well-being of our society. I think we may end up with an awful lot of compulsive gamblers that maybe have not reared their heads yet, but as the years go by, that number may grow.
And then, John, I'm sorry. How is it though, being, since you're the revenue collector and all that, like operating in the political world, you have all these different, you have a budget that's being run, but it seems like, are they always trying to put their hands in your pocket and you're trying to fight that kind of that?
Of course, the money gets appropriated through the legislature, signed by the governor. But where we were always the watchdog, or tried to be the watchdog, was in issuing debt. And when I first took office, we were one of the most debt-burdened states in the country. Excuse me, my apologies. So at any rate, we had one of the heaviest debt loads in the country. We had the worst bond rating of any state in the country in 1999. So that's where a state treasurer comes in and says, listen, legislators, you just can't keep spending this way, because if we've got the worst bond rating in America, that's like having the highest interest rate of any state in America in terms of what you're paying. That's not a good thing. So that's where we tried to be vigilant. I think we did a good job.
Yeah, John, let's do one more. We're about to wrap it up pretty soon.
Joe, you mentioned that you were one of 7. I can only imagine what dinner time was like, or family trips were like. Italian American family. Just talk a little bit about what were some of the things that shaped you. You're definitely a guy that everyone likes, and you've helped a lot of people and been a great facilitator of teams and led a number of teams. Where did that come from? Did you read it in a book in the library? Happen in the school ground, the world of hard knocks? Like, how did you become you?
I thank you for the premise of your question. It's interesting, as I mentioned, my mom becomes a single mom at the age of 12. And I think priority one was, I saw what she was going through, and I said, well, how can I be as small of a headache for her as possible? And, I always wanted to make her proud. And so I played football in high school and through college. And, in that respect, I became captain of the team and then president of the student council. And the more I succeeded in things like that, the happier I saw her, the more it was a motivation to me. And then for whatever reason, she had this dream in her mind that I was going to go to Harvard. So that motivated me to get there. And then once I came out, it was, always a case of building upon one source of confidence after another. And the other thing I would say is I just always had a love for people. I run into people now, even down in Florida here, been here, for a short stay. They're from Massachusetts. They'll come up and start talking. And, 15 minutes later, we're still talking. But I love that. At Harvard, it was always the folks who worked in the dining hall or the folks who worked down at Harvard Stadium that, I'd end up, asking them about their kids. And, he told me last time we talked, he was waiting to hear on school, whatever happened with that. So it was just, something that I guess was in my DNA. But the happiest times I had when I was in state government was when I was out of the state house, where you're mingling with folks and, having a chance to say, geez, you know what? I just had a conversation with a complete stranger, and I had the privilege of learning more about that person. And so now in my private sector world, if you're in one of those meetings, let's say with an investor, I like to know a little bit about them and what makes them tick, and let them know a little bit about me, humanizing the relationship. So yeah, it has served me well. And I thank you, John, for the question.
I'd like to remind our listeners today that you can find this show, all shows, on Google, Stitch, SoundCloud, YouTube. iHeart is nationally syndicated. Anywhere you can find your podcast, we'd like to get your followership. Smash that follow and like button. Joe, we're going to wrap up now. Your contact information is going to be in the body of the show. But for our listeners, if anybody's interested in your work and some of the great stuff that you're doing, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Sure. J.D. Malone, M-A-L-O-N-E. So it's J as in Joseph, D as in Daniel, Malone at Comcast.net. You can reach me there, or I won't be so bold as to give out my cell phone number, but J.D. Malone at Comcast.net.
Great. Well, thanks again for your time, Joe. It was a great pleasure, and we wish you continued success.
Congratulations on the show, and thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Joe.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond, and the shrimp.